Bitcoin has dropped to nearly $76,000 and $661 million were liquidated overnight. All of this right after Michael Saylor bought $2 billion worth of Bitcoin. But the price action is not the most interesting story today. The most interesting story is coming out of Iran with Hormuz Safe, a Bitcoin proposal from the state of Iran. I'm going to tell you about that and much more right now. Let's go. What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Daily Wolf on Yahoo Finance. I'm your host, Scott Melker, also known as the Wolf of All Streets. I hope you all had a wonderful, calm, and peaceful weekend, because now we got to dive right back into it. It's Monday morning, and we've got a lot to talk about. And there is actually some signal here amongst all the noise. So the first story that we have here, hot in from the Yahoo Finance crypto hub, which you should be checking out. The Morning Minute, Bitcoin slides back to 77K on rising bond yields, oil spike. So first of all, we can update that because it's back to almost 76K. It got right there in the last few hours. Now, I love that we always have to assign a narrative to price action. People saying that it's because of rising bond yields and the oil spike. I think those effectively have happened after this Bitcoin move or during, but it's certainly not the reason. Many people pointing to Trump's Truth Social on Sunday night, where he said, for Iran, the clock is ticking and they better get moving fast or there won't be anything left of them. Time is of the essence. Those are interesting takes onto why Bitcoin is moving. Now, they could be partially correct. Now, if you think about it, when Trump decides to say something on a Saturday or a Sunday, there's nothing that anyone can sell when they're in a panic, except for Bitcoin, which trades 24/7, 365. So we do often see Bitcoin move in either direction based on a headline, because nothing else is trading and people tend to want liquidity on the weekend, and that's the place that they can go get it. So I don't find that particularly interesting. All markets are down today. I think a lot of this may actually lead into the second story today, which is one that I've been reporting on constantly, because I think these are tied together. This, of course, from Michael Saylor. Strategy has acquired 24,869 Bitcoin for $2.01 billion at 80,985 per Bitcoin, and has achieved a Bitcoin yield of 12.6% year-to-date 2026. They now hold 843,738 Bitcoin, acquired for almost $64 billion at 75,700 per Bitcoin. So one, almost trading right back to Saylor's cost basis, buying at 81,000. He actually averaged up on his position slightly, although now 25,000 Bitcoin buy in a week is a rounding area. B, we saw this happening last week in real time on STRC. I showed you the dashboard. I showed you exactly how much was being bought while it was. So imagine now we have this player in the market who not only do we know is going to buy Bitcoin, but we can literally transparently in real time watch it happening, because we know the functionality of STRC and what Saylor does when it goes above par. So you have to imagine there are a lot of traders, hedge funds, big money that's going to trade into and around that knowledge, right? It's basically like having inside knowledge of what's going to happen in a market with a huge buyer. So my new working theory, and I've talked about this quite a bit, is that in advance of ex-dividend, which is effectively the middle of the month for STRC, although they're proposing to do it twice a month, you know that Michael Saylor is about to buy a lot of Bitcoin. So as a trader, you can front run that very transparent purchasing of Bitcoin. And then when Bitcoin kind of hits that top right around when it's actually happening and the buying's happening, you can sell, wait for price to come back down, rinse and repeat. People are doing it with STRC from $99 to $101. And I have a very strong feeling that they're doing it on Bitcoin as well, because that is just too obvious of a trade not to take. Now, interestingly, people always point out that Michael Saylor buys the top. He says he will be buying the top forever. He doesn't care what price Bitcoin is. He'll buy it, 150,000, the same that he'll buy at 15 million. And people know that he actually means it. So we had news last week that Michael Saylor, 2 weeks ago now, I guess, saying that he would potentially sell Bitcoin if he had to, but you can ignore what he's saying and watch what he's doing. $2 billion more worth of Bitcoin bought in 1 week. And yes, the headlines will tell you that he was instantly down 5%. Not entirely true, because the announcement is not when the Bitcoin are bought. It's that they were bought last week. But he doesn't care. Being down 5% on a Bitcoin purchase is irrelevant to him, because like you, he takes a long-term view. and is looking to hold this asset for decades to come. Now, those are stories about price action and the fundamentals of the market, but I think the bigger stories this week are really about the state and Bitcoin, because almost every story we have right now is about what governments at the state level and the national level are doing with Bitcoin. And this is perhaps the biggest one of those stories that we've ever had. What is Hormuz Safe? Iran uses Bitcoin and crypto to build a swift, free shipping system. So let's first break down what Hormuz Safe is, and then we can talk about why it actually matters. So Iran is exploring Bitcoin-settled maritime insurance. They say they may be turning to it, and this is from local reports, but this is being openly reported, and there's actually a website for it that you can see yourself. So the mechanism here is that cargo owners buy cryptographically verified insurance and financial responsibility certificates instead of paying explicit tolls. It's insurance. It's not a toll. It's insurance. What is this insurance backed by? I have no idea. Right? This is like the mafia offering you insurance when they come into your restaurant, right? You pay the insurance, you know. This is a toll, right? But tolls have been banned, so they're calling it insurance. And basically, if you have $100 million in cargo, you have to pay $1 million in insurance for passage through the Straits of Hormuz. Once again, like if your ship gets blown up by the U.S., I doubt they're going to write you a check for $100 million. But the most interesting point here, besides the fact that they said this will be $10 billion in revenue potentially monthly, I don't believe that either. The United States still has a blockade, is that they're asking for the payment in Bitcoin, right? I mean, this is a fascinating story, especially, let me give you a history of Iran and crypto and Bitcoin, and then we'll get to why this is so fascinating. So obviously in 2018, Trump pulled out of the JCPOA and Iran lost access to the dollar and SWIFT system. And then immediately in 2019, Iran's parliament legalized industrial Bitcoin mining. At one point, probably from 2020 to 2022, at their peak, they had 427,000 mining devices, 4.2% of global hash rate. And this was at a cost basis of $1,300 per Bitcoin because Iran had the electricity for free because it was the government doing it. So they were able to mine exceptionally cheaply. I mean, their on-chain economy was $7.78 billion in Iran in 2025. And this all while obviously their currency was down 96% versus the United States dollar. So Iran has long had a history with Bitcoin. There were these power outages that used to happen in Iran that have now been linked to them turning on their Bitcoin miners. I mean, this was a huge operation for them. They've been using it to evade sanctions for better or for worse for years. Now we get to the uncomfortable part, right? Because Bitcoiners have long said that sovereign nations should use Bitcoin because it's censorship resistant, it has no issuer, it's a neutral monetary infrastructure. But you got to get very uncomfortable when you see who's using it as a result of that. Obviously, North Korea, not specifically to Bitcoin, but massive crypto hacks, tens of billions of dollars. And now Iran, for the first time, coming out here. This is what people on TV, I don't think, are getting when they're talking about coming out and saying that Bitcoin's whole reason for existence is the reason that we need to use this for Hormuz Safe. We can't use dollars. They're sanctioned. They can be taken back. We were using Tether, USDT, which they said they will still accept, but they primarily want Bitcoin. But we had over $300 million of that seized from Iran just last month in Operation Economic Fury. So Bitcoin is the only one that doesn't have an issuer and has nobody that can roll it back. And those are its best qualities, but in this case, they're also the qualities that allow a government like Iran to use it to potentially evade sanctions and to charge for insurance in the Straits of Hormuz. I think this is a really fascinating story. This is the first time that we've had a sovereign nation basically say the quiet part out loud. They've been using Bitcoin and crypto, as I told you, for years. But to say that we are going to effectively evade the blockade and charge for admission through the Straits of Hormuz in Bitcoin is the first time in my knowledge that we've seen something like that. It's going to be very interesting to follow this story. I think the sad part, obviously, is that the anti-crypto army and the Elizabeth Warrens of the world are obviously going to use this as fodder to fight against Bitcoin and crypto. They're going to tell you that these foreign governments are using it for illicit purposes. And listen, there's some truth to that. But once again, this is agnostic technology that can be used for many purposes. In this case, it's a very controversial one. Now, Iran's not the only nation state that has been using Bitcoin for various reasons. And one of the ones you haven't heard about much over the years is Bhutan. So this is a hell of a headline. Bhutan doesn't recall. I can't remember it. I don't know, maybe. Selling any Bitcoin, disputing widely tracked 1 billion Bitcoin drawdown. So Arkham Intelligence is an on-chain analyst. They track the wallets of multiple entities, including the government of Bhutan. Now, many people, because they're such a small country, less than 1 million people, landlocked in the Himalayas, they don't know the history of Bhutan and Bitcoin, but it's incredible. And they're arguably at a point where one of the top 3 sovereigns, United States, El Salvador, and Bhutan, participating in Bitcoin. So in 2019, their king, Jigme Kesar Wangchuck, everybody Wangchuck tonight. You can't see that guy's name and not think of the 80s band Wang Chung, right? But yeah, I mean, he allowed their sovereign wealth fund, DHI, to participate in Bitcoin mining, and they scaled massively through 2020 to 2022. And then 2023 famously did a huge partnership, $500 million with BitDeer. At the peak in October of 2024, they had 13,000 Bitcoin. Now, that doesn't seem like such a big number when you see Michael Saylor buying 25,000 in a week. But for Bhutan, that represented 40% of their entire GDP. So yes, the number itself is not huge in a vacuum, but for this country, that was 40% of their gross domestic product. Now, they always said that they were not hodlers, like a Michael Saylor. They did not intend to hold this forever. They were actually mining to spend. And it's really fascinating that they sold 100 million in 2023, very transparently, to double civil servant salaries. They used it for an actually exceptional purpose, and other ones that we could list if we wanted to. But they managed actually to stop a massive outflow of civil servants from their government, 1,900 down to 500 leaving, because they were able to double their salaries by selling Bitcoin. But what's in contention here is what's happened since then. So we know that they actually, sadly, sent 817 million in Bitcoin in 2021 to BlockFi and Celsius. We don't know how that ended, but obviously those ended in bankruptcies and most people were not made whole. But since that top in 2024 and even another billion in 2026, we've seen them massively exiting. Like I said, they're not admitting that they sold it. They don't recall ever selling that Bitcoin. There's very little evidence that they're still mining, which is very curious because they have all the gear and they have the cheap electricity. But right now, the economics at 77K at an all-time high with the difficulty and this post-halving rewards, maybe it's just not worth it for them to mine Bitcoin anymore. But incredible, this tiny Himalayan kingdom is under scrutiny here, but has been a massive contributor to Bitcoin and the network over the years. Now, another story that I find just fascinating in context of what we've been talking about here for the past few weeks is this one. Bitcoin Depot, North America's largest Bitcoin ATM operator, files for bankruptcy. So I think this is really sad. So I told you last week when we broke down the parts of the Clarity Act that there was very specific language, Section 205 in the Clarity Act, for a federal ATM framework. Now, Canada, Brazil, others looking to ban crypto ATMs because they're being used in pig butchering scams, which I've broken down for you before. To me, that's like trying to ban iPhones because drug dealers are using them to make drug deals or because scammers are texting you fake links, right? It's an agnostic technology, the ATM is, and so is the phone. So I think it's absurd to ban them. But interestingly here, if you read the quote from CEO Alex Holmes, the regulatory environment for Bitcoin operators has shifted significantly. States have imposed increasingly stringent compliance obligations, including new transaction limits, and in some jurisdictions, outright restrictions or bans. These have made it the current business model unsustainable. So even though the United States is moving to legalize and regulate Bitcoin ATMs, certain countries and certainly certain states are looking to ban them and have banned them. So this company, which represented 28% of all Bitcoin ATMs in the United States, 9,000 ATMs, now being forced to file Chapter 11 bankruptcy because they didn't make it long enough to see the Clarity Act put into law and to survive. Really sad and crazy story. Tomorrow, I think I'll tell you a bit more about what's happening in Minnesota because it's really fascinating and in the same context. So listen, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Iran if people take that Bitcoin adoption sitting down. I don't think so, but that's a story for another day because I'm done with the Daily Wolf today. See you tomorrow. Peace.